Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to start the first slot of the program of the third day with your applause. Уважаемые дамы и господа, мы готовы открывать первый слот программы третьего дня, проект V&A East, революционный подход к музейной коллекции мирового уровня в рамках программы New Now в Манеже. Под ваши аплодисменты.
Доброе утро, друзья. Спасибо большое, что это субботним утром начинаете в Манеже. Всем, кто проснулся, мы очень рады вас видеть. Во-первых, я хотела бы поблагодарить культурный форум за то, что мы сделали такую замечательную коллаборацию с нашей программой New Now в Манеже. New Now в Манеже – это международная образовательная программа. Это встреча с теми деятелями культурной сферы, которые прямо сейчас на наших глазах меняют что-то в культурном пространстве, меняют то, как, зачем и почему мы ходим в музеи, меняют то, как мы взаимодействуем с искусством. Сегодня у нас замечательная встреча, на которой впервые в России будет представлен проект V&A East, самый амбициозный проект Лондонского музея Виктории Альберт. С самого основания музея в 1852 году. Сегодня у нас в гостях замечательный куратор из Лондона Кэтрин Инce. Давайте поприветствуем. Кэтрин Инce – ведущий куратор и руководитель программы будущего музея V&A East. Кэтрин будет отвечать как за программу, так и за общее развитие этого музея, который должен будет открыться в 2023 году в Лондоне на месте уже бывшей Олимпийской деревни. Огромный, сложный, безумно амбициозный девелопмент, о котором нам сегодня расскажет Кэтрин. Сама Кэтрин ведущий специалист по дизайну, архитектуре, по выставочным практикам, куратор музея Виктории Альберт. Кэтрин, тогда мы передаем вам слово. Я предлагаю вам всем готовить ваши вопросы. После выступления Кэтрин я вернусь сюда, и мы сможем уже после лекции продолжить диалог с Кэтрин напрямую. Спасибо большое.
Thank you. I'm not going to wear my earpiece because it's a bit distracting. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to Anna for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to join here today. Can you hear okay? I'm getting a slight bit of feedback. I'm just going to talk you through what we're planning for V&A East. It's been sort of 4.5 years in development already. It's been a very tumultuous project. Bit of a roller coaster through what it means to develop a new museum, to build a new cultural district, the politics involved in that, the financial, economic roller coaster. And now we're sort of starting to build and still in the process of working out our programs, what we'll do there exactly, and how that is importantly for us very embedded in the local community but with a very international outlook. As Anna said, I'm the chief curator. I'm leading the planning of the displays, of the exhibitions, of the creative programs. It's what people will see and do when they come to both of our spaces. But very excitingly for us, we've just appointed our first director of V&A East. It won't be called V&A East. We're going to work out a name for it because we won't be opening until 2023. So we have another sort of 3.5 years to go. And that director is Gus Casely-Hayford, who may be known to some of you. He's a very eminent cultural historian, scholar of both arts and social history. He's currently the director of the African Art Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., so he'll be moving back to London next spring to start work with us and with me, lead the team to continue to develop V&A East with our director, Tristram Hunt, and our deputy director, Tim Reeve. So what I'm going to do is just give you a sort of whirlwind journey of where we're at with our planning, tell you about the ways in which we're researching, looking into our collection, and the general direction of travel. And I'll have to come back in a couple of years with with photos of what it all ended up like. So where do I point this. Okay, here we go. So as Anna said, some of you, I hope, will be familiar with the V&A. It's a very important institution in Britain. It holds many national collections of art, design and performance, but also has a very far reach internationally. We've collaborated a lot here in Russia, of course, and around the world with touring exhibitions. We just announced this week that our recent opera exhibition will be traveling to Moscow. It has a long and involved and interesting history, and we hold something in the region of 2.3 million objects in the collection that are devoted to all different works of art and design. So we collect architecture, both physical fragments and examples of architecture, as well as architectural designs and things that represent architecture culture more broadly, product design, graphic design, fashion, textiles, furniture, ceramics, glass, drawings, paintings, photography. The list goes on. So it's a very eclectic place. And we stop our sort of sculpture collections, for example, in the early 20th century. We agree with Tate that we will only collect painting up until 1900. But in other dimensions of art and design and performance practice, we are very much a contemporary collecting institution. So we have a long history of building this collection. The collection represents the fashions and changing tastes of the time. And for that, it's also sort of formed by the politics and the sort of cultural context of the mid to late 19th century. So we have an enormous South Asian collection that comes from the East India Company Museum that was formed out of our sort of colonial and empire practices in India, and those collections both represent a sort of extraordinary range of creative practice and craftsmanship of Indian culture at that time, but are also objects with very complex histories, and the museum is increasingly looking at different ways of engaging with and interpreting and unpacking some of the histories represented in the museum's collection. So, not the most exciting visual slide you've ever seen, but just thought it useful to look at some of our kind of mission and drivers. And Tristram Hunt, who's our newish director, he joined the museum only a few years ago after Martin Roth went back to Germany. We're in the middle of kind of revising our strategic objectives, but we're always driven by this sort of ambition to constantly improve our spaces and our experience for our visitors and collaborators, looking at ways in which we can enhance and deepen the relevance of our collections. How do we talk about history in a way that captures the imagination of a teenager or somebody whose background is not soaked in the sort of arts and culture that the museum represents? How can we work together in an innovative way with international partners and maintain our reach? And I think these are, of course, the sort of mission and values which we are taking forward with V&A East, but we're sort of taking that one step further with a very specific agenda at V&A East. So just a little bit on the foundations of the museum. We came out of the Great Exhibition of 1851, and the first director of the V&A was a man called Henry Cole, who is a design reformer and a bit of an inventor himself. And he, together with Prince Albert, established the Royal Commission for the exhibition of 1851. Henry Cole had seen lots of international exhibitions in places like Paris, and really wanted to sort of lobby to improve the standards of design and manufacturing in Britain at that time, and felt that the formation of a great exhibition could help do this, could help communicate to the public the value and importance of high-quality design and manufacturing, and bring together the best that Britain had to offer, including the work of those nations which were under British rule at that time. So this is a view, what you're seeing here is a view of the so-called Crystal Palace, which was where one went to experience the Great Exhibition of 1851. And you can see here a sort of illustration that was made at the time of people promenading through this immense kind of beautiful glass house devoted to the art of industry of all nations as the event came to be known. And Cole was a very interesting thinker. The museum has a long and sort of complex history in that we were first the South Kensington Museums, and we included the Science Museum collections up until that point. We also collected all sorts of different objects beyond the kind of collections that you see today. We had collections related to food production and to waste management, all sorts of different things. You're going to have to forgive me, I have a terrible cold, so I can feel myself sounding blocked up. But yeah, so the museum collection really started coming out of the Great Exhibition of 1851, and we made a number of acquisitions, or they made a number of acquisitions from the Great Exhibition that was the sort of foundational collection. But Cole had also had important relationships with the Government School of Design, and so these different organizations and bodies that were all about teaching of design came together to form the South Kensington Museums. And this is what you see today, the so-called Albertopolis. If I point my laser, how do I do that to get does the laser work? Do we know? Doesn't matter. Anyway, so the exhibition in 1851 took place in the green spaces that you can see at the top of the slide here. For those of you who haven't been to London, it's in West London, just west of Buckingham Palace. It's called Albertopolis in homage to Prince Albert, who was a pivotal figure in sort of art and design, education reform and development at this time. And it refers to this constellation of institutions that were built as a consequence of this sort of transitional moment in 1851. So we have the V&A, the Red Line, going to our site here. I should be pointing up there. And then the campus includes, as I said, the Science Museum, which eventually moved out of the South Kensington Museum, Natural History Museum, which you can see in the foreground, just the red line going through it, Imperial College, a very important academic institution, the Royal College of Art, which up until 1964 was located at the V&A, and then moved into a new building next to the Royal Albert Hall, which is a very special space for performance, particularly of classical music and theatre programs. And this sort of road leads up to the park, and this whole campus is referred to as Albertopolis, and I think that is a very important sort of starting point for the project in East London, which I'm going to go on and talk about. I should just point out the new entrance that we've developed on Exhibition Road. So until 2017, we didn't really have a face onto Exhibition Road that was significant for the general public. It was where school groups would arrive. It looked a bit sort of dated. And so we undertook a very significant project to dig down into the very deep foundations of our building to create this new courtyard, new entrance straight from the street. It's designed by Amanda Levitt Architects, who may be familiar to some of you. And what you're looking at there in the courtyard is the roof of our major new gallery space, so where we held our opera exhibition, where we just presented the Christian Dior exhibition. We have a new cafe in the courtyard, and for the first time you can see straight through to the central garden of the V&A, so it's a very important sort of public connection, new civic space, inviting sort of space for visitors to come and discover, and for us to have a dialogue with the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum and Imperial College across the road. So the V&A is an enormous institution. We have 7 miles of permanent galleries devoted to period styles, to places of the world. So we have galleries of India, East Asia, including Japan, Korea, China, newly refurbished galleries looking at the sort of idea of Europe between 1600 and 1815. Then we have galleries devoted to time period where we might look at design from 1900 to today, or techniques, materials, and different types of art practice. So we've got an enormous ceramics collection, and have just reopened and redisplayed our photography collection in the first phase of 2 new galleries. And we're creating a photo sort of center for the public, so they'll be able to come and look at the photography we have in the collection, but also we're creating new reading rooms and places to look at instruments of photography, but also photo books, which is an incredibly important part of the visual culture and communication of photography. And this is in relation to the recent acquisition of the Royal Society of Royal Photographic Society collection. So we've just acquired 400,000 prints from the Science Museum. So we now hold in the region of 1 million photographic artifacts. So it's particularly rich in the foundations of photography in the 19th century and early 20th century. So the V&A has now become the sort of epic international center for the history of photography. But as well as collection galleries, you know, we mount major temporary exhibitions. We have an entire education center, so this idea of the schoolroom for everyone continues through, always with our programs in dedicated spaces where you can undertake and partake in hands-on activities, but you can also go to lectures, go to seminars, take a course. And then we have important facilities like the National Art Library, a significant holding of books. So anybody can join the library. We make a huge number of our publications available to everybody. We also hold lots of important sort of printed and hand-produced treasures. So we have the largest number of Dickens manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts in the country, which is a very strange anomaly. You'd think they'd be at the British Library, but over the years, certain patrons and collectors have donated significant things to the V&A. And the kind of social life of the institution is very important too, and the ways in which we create spaces for the public to come and just enjoy being in the museum, to dwell, to have a drink, to meet their friends, is a critical part of the sort of encounter of and experience of our institution. And the V&A was one of the earliest museums, if not the first, to introduce a public cafe, to introduce gas lighting so that people could come and visit the museum in the evening in the 19th century. And all of these gestures were about trying to encourage a public who may have not previously thought about coming to the museum or had been able to. Just to give you a little sense of some of our galleries, our collection galleries. So the ceramics gallery that you can see there, we have both sort of focused displays of new acquisitions or very specific examples of studio ceramics or sculptural art ceramics, but also this kind of incredible encyclopedic display of nearly everything we hold in the collection. On the bottom right is, left rather, is the photography center, phase 1. We have commissions by contemporary practitioners embedded in the museum. So you can see in the top left image, the red band with the white porcelain is a work by the ceramicist Edmond de Waal, who's very close to the museum, is an outgoing trustee. The museum has always used its building as a way to foreground contemporary creative practice. The time we were building in the 19th century, we commissioned people like William Morris to make our cafe, for example. And this sort of tradition continues today. As I said, we also have a reputation for staging very scholarly, very in-depth, but very experiential, kind of enjoyable exhibitions about thematic subjects, but also about figures in history or contemporary practice. And this is just an example of a very successful Alexander McQueen exhibition, Savage Beauty, which was staged in 2015. And this constant play of what an exhibition can be, what one can experience, how one can experience the visual and material culture that we're presenting is very important to the V&A, and to continue to find new ways to immerse the visitor in the subject is critical to our approach. I just wanted to give a flavor of the types of events and activities that we build around our programs and our collection. We're known now for quite a lively programming where we aim to engage with our younger audiences who are increasingly sort of politicized and interested in finding a cultural space where they can have difficult conversations about what is happening in society and how creativity is a driver for unfurling and unpicking some of these questions. So you can see on the right-hand side a space that's kind of open plan for discussion, for activity that's embedded in our Europe galleries. And that was an important sort of gesture to you're walking through a history of Europe at a certain period of time, but we're also in a very significant sort of transitional moment, particularly in the UK. And we won't go there, but it feels like it's important for the museum to build in spaces where we can have a dialogue with our audiences, with our collaborators, to think about where we want to go in the future. So we do a lot of hands-on practice as well, and that teaching of design, working with contemporary practitioners to explore skills, to explore creativity for all ages is incredibly important. The image on the left is from a visit to our collection centres, which are just down the road from the museum, which I'll talk about in relation to the V&A East project. That this group was one that I took to the centre to look at some fashion collection objects. They're a group of young people interested in developing their careers in the creative industries. They come from East London, where we're building a new museum. They're part of a creative program to help young people develop their skills and an experience as a way of furthering their career opportunities. And they were working on a brief around the notion of deconstruction. So we'd brought out objects from the collection, from Alexander McQueen's last collection to early examples of Vivienne Westwood's kind of punk wear with Malcolm McLaren, through to kind of the tracing of the notion of deconstruction back to 18th century men's slashed waistcoats or cupwork embroidery samplers. So what we were trying to do was sort of show and have this sort of conversation with young people about things that feel very contemporary conceptually have roots in historic garments, and there's a very expansive way in which you can sort of develop ideas or use the historic collections as a starting point for thinking through how you would approach your work today. So the V&A East project, which I'll come on to, is part of this sort of ongoing expansion of the V&A. We have been working in East London since 1867. We're not new to East London at all. And the V&A Museum of Childhood, which you can see on the top right, was originally the Bethnal Green Museum and was part of a kind of expansion project at that midpoint in the 19th century, probably in its day quite a sort of paternalistic, let's teach the working class about good things. Since the 1970s, it's been the V&A Museum of Childhood. Throughout the sort of mid-20th century, the museum had started to collect a lot of work related to childhood, designing for children, objects from childhood, of childhood, and had built up this amazing collection, which is now sort of considered the national collection of childhood material, as well as archives related to the sort of study and manufacturing for that particular market. The museum is a little out of date, it's a little tired. It's a historic building that we are in the process of or about to renovate. And inside we're about to completely redisplay our entire collection there, reconceive the experience of the Museum of Childhood. It's a very popular place, it's very well loved, very well used. It serves its local communities incredibly well. It's free, everybody can just go in, enjoy, crawl all over the place, do whatever they want. And we want to build on that experience so that it becomes, it retains the character of a museum. There will be things on display to inspire you, to look at, to engage with, to explore together with your family or with your tutors, teachers who might be taking you there, but also critically it's an important place where for children to experience and for young people to be engaging in creative subjects, in artistic practice. I'm not sure of the education context here, but in Britain we are eroding the teaching of art and design education in our state, in our formal education years. It's not something that is a priority. It's harder and harder for teachers to incorporate artistic practice and creative education in the classroom. And we feel as an institution that this is one of the biggest challenges that the country has to face, because if we don't produce independent, creative, critical thinkers at a young age, then we'll be in a very bad situation in years to come. And art and design and creativity is present in science and technology and engineering and all sorts of different other sectors, and the combination of that skill set is what makes for the kind of inventors and important thinkers of the future. So the Museum of Charters is transitioning and will be closing next year to reopen in 2022, just a year before we reopen. 2 years ago now, we also finally saw the opening of our museum in Dundee, which was another type of partnership and collaboration. Very important context in the city. It's the culmination of a partnership between two universities, a creative enterprise council, and the V&A, and it was felt like Dundee wanted a significant museum presence in a city of a relatively modest population, but that it has a lot of important art schools and smaller galleries. And so this idea was that the V&A Dundee became the sort of centre for Scottish design history and contemporary Scottish design practice. It's a city that's known for its long history in sort of comics production, but also in more recent years, it's a very important centre for video game design and interaction design. So there's this sort of rich kind of cultural context and creative context that the V&A felt would be a really inspiring sort of place in which to add to that, amplify that, and create more infrastructure for the city. So the building here is designed by Kengo Kuma, Japanese architect. It's a very beautiful gesture on the waterfront in the post-war period, particularly in the 60s and 70s. All along the waterfront, some people in Dundee Council decided, rather stupidly, I think, to just build a series of super ugly buildings. And so now you see this kind of amazing piece of architecture by Kengo Kuma that will hopefully continue to sort of challenge the decisions that are made in the built environment in Dundee. But it's become a great sort of beacon for art and design and architecture, and that's because it's been a long process of embedding itself in the city before anything was built, before the doors opened. The teams there and the collaborators across the universities were working very long and hard on the ways in which the institution could be in the mindsets of everybody who lived in the city long before it opened. So they did a big campaign of working with different communities, working with children, teachers, young people, community groups to really think through together what the city needed, what resources it needed, what programs it would like to see, what experiences people would want, so that it became an integral part of the city landscape, not just for tourists coming to visit Dundee for the day, but for the population in general. And another kind of example of the ways in which we're expanding the V&A and thinking about opportunities to open up access to the collection, to collaborate in a different context, is our recent project at Design Society in Sheku in Shenzhen. And this is the building that you can see here, the white one in the foreground, is a new sort of complex of different spaces. And as the Design Society was building its collection and building its programs and developing what it wanted to do, the V&A came in, has been the presence for the past several years with a collection exhibition looking at sort of contemporary design from 1900 to now, thinking through the ways in which the value systems within design work. And that was really to enable then Design Society to have longer to plan and think about its programs, to test out what audiences there were interested in. And we continue to work together with touring exhibition partnerships. So all of these different sites and different ways of operating are really challenging the museum to think about what it does, how it does what it does, and what the V&A actually means. Is the V&A just South Kensington anymore? In people's minds, I think it will always be that, but I think these different sites allow us to experiment with, to reach, and work with very specific audiences in different contexts, and to change the way we approach our programs and our relevance for today. So I realized when I was looking through the slides again this morning that I've forgotten to put a slide in here, so I'm going to go forward a few slides, and then I'm going to go back a few slides. Sorry, excuse me. We're going to fast forward we're going to go back in time to 2013, and just after the London Olympics in 2012. As you may know, the bid for the Olympic Games for London was very much about the ways in which the Olympics could deliver a longer-term strategy and legacy for the city, and particularly for this part of East London, which the green belt that you see here was very much a light industrial area, lots of businesses, some of them not particularly sort of pleasant trades, were all operating in this area. And it was about trying to sort of, have a moment of celebration, have the fantastic Olympic Games, but then transform this part of London into an area where more people could live, more people would work, and more people would come and visit and do things. And so the infrastructure that you can see here on this aerial shot is what was developed and built for the park. You've got the stadium, Olympic Stadium in the background, which now is West Ham Football Club during the football season. And at other times, they still host international athletics, all sorts of different events, music, concerts, and so on. In the just above the rear orange spot, you can see the sort of swooping roof of the aquatic centre, which is the Olympic swimming pool designed by Zaha Hadid for the Games, which is still there, still operating as a swimming pool, very popular, both with the sort of Olympic athletes who train there, but also local families and school children who come and use the pool recreationally. Just off of the slide, you can just about see it, that little sort of round thing on the left is the cycling velodrome, which again is still operational. And what's happening around the park is that the infrastructure that was built for the Games was, so the houses or the athletes' villages have been turned into residential communities. They're building more homes. They've been putting in business infrastructure, so offices and retail and so on. And just after the Games, they started to think about how they could deliver on other dimensions to make a place, to make a new part of the city that are very important to one's experience, one's lived experience. So it was decided that there would be a focus on a cultural and education legacy. And a number of partners were invited to make this new campus. And at the time, Boris Johnson was Mayor of London. And saw this as a kind of opportunity to reinvent the Albertopolis of Kensington for the 21st century. How might we bring together academic research institutions with cultural institutions who are looking at the now and are sites of production in and of themselves, and not just places of showcasing art, to create this district that would draw from its local context but be a kind of world stage. And so the project was originally called Olympicopolis. Nobody could pronounce Olympicopolis, so that was quickly killed as an idea. Well, not quickly, but eventually, particularly after Boris Johnson was no longer mayor of London. And it's been rebranded East Bank, which in a way is a sort of slight gesture to the South Bank, which, as you know, is a sort of important mixed cultural space in the centre of London, as a sort of outcome of the First City of Britain in 1951, a direct 100-year anniversary after the Great Exhibition of 1851. So the competition was launched to build this new destination for London, as it says here, with world-class architecture and education at its heart, and to really enhance the experience of the park. And the partners that are collaborating together to build this new series of spaces and this new place are the V&A, obviously, and we are working in partnership with the Smithsonian Institution, who were originally invited to be a partner but weren't able to because to open their own building because of the sort of complexities of being a federally funded institution. The London College of Fashion, which you can see in the centre of the site here, have a distributed campus. They've got maybe 6 or 7 different buildings across London, and that makes it very difficult for students and researchers and academics to have the kind of cross-disciplinary integrated dialogue that they need to create a really fertile space for research and for teaching. So they're bringing all of that together in one new site, one new campus. There'll be 5,000 students in this building. And then next to them is the BBC, who are looking for a new space for broadcasting, recording music programs, particularly classical music programs, but also other forms of music that we hear mainly on Radio 6 and parts of Radio 3, so quite experimental contemporary music programs. So that will be a publicly accessible space, so people will be able to go in, listen to rehearsals, be part of the audience when they're live broadcasting. And then next to them, Sadler's Wells, which is an important commissioning dance house in London, with a long history in theatre in the city. We're looking to expand too, because they have a very large auditoria and a very small sort of black box theatre, but nothing mid-size for kind of establishing mid-career choreographers and dance companies to present their work. So Sadler's Wells' building will include an auditorium, but also, critically for them, studios for practitioners and associates with whom they work, but that which means that they can teach from those spaces too. So they will be teaching contemporary dance, and they will be developing the UK's first hip-hop and street dance academy. Because a number of their associates work in this field. It's a really flourishing field of dance in the UK, particularly, and they've been an important house in commissioning and enabling this work to find its way onto the stage. And then out of this shot, just sort of on the other side of the site, University College London are opening a new campus within the region of sort of 10,000 students expected there. New programs coming out of existing faculties from Bloomsbury, but also, so we have a kind of manifestation of the Slade School of Art coming here, but also they're developing new programs, new research opportunities, and new public spaces so that their work can reach a broader public outside of the world of academia on a more regular basis and with more sort of relevance and opportunity for a greater number of people. And this sort of campus is an important dimension for the project. It's not just about sort of sitting together as a bunch of neighbors in a terrace, but actually what we're trying to do and working on very intensely is the ways in which we can come together to be greater than the sum of our parts, to really create this sort of cross-disciplinary, fertile kind of experimental research culture out of which our programs and projects will emerge. This is all sort of in play, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but the thing that all of us are really concentrating on the moment is the ways in which we can embed ourselves within an existing community. So we're collaborating a lot with arts organizations, cultural institutions, individuals, community groups that exist in the environs of the Olympic Park. You've got so here East, which you can see there, and you saw earlier on the slide, is the broadcasting centre that was built to deliver all of the broadcasting of the games. It's an enormous shed, basically. And there are lots of tenants in there, from commercial companies like BT Sport and Matches Fashion, through to artistic practitioners like Wayne McGregor, the choreographer, or academic institutions like the University College London, the Bartlett School of Architecture, who wanted a space of this size and scale, not dissimilar to the room we're in, so that they could develop opportunities for larger scale digital and robotic fabrication and research practices. So they've just been in for a couple of years and are really getting to grips with what they can do with their new spaces, what they can do with their new infrastructure, and how they can cultivate new academic programs that feed into the sort of technology and innovation context of Here East and this constellation of partners. So you can see how it's sort of building up and growing, and then in the series of buildings that are partially built already, just behind where the museum and London College of Fashion will be, is a new space for a number of sort of semi-public and public organisations. So Transport for London, the organisation that keeps London moving on a daily basis, will have its new headquarters there. The headquarters of Cancer Research will be there, and the British Council, I'm sure will be familiar to you here in Russia, will be relocating their UK-based operations there. So we'll have this sort of growing context of potential partners and collaborators to work with. I thought it was important to also give you a sense of where we are in London and the demography of the 4 Olympic boroughs, at which the park sits at the heart. We've got Hackney, Waltham Forest, Newham and Tower Hamlets, all Olympic legacy boroughs. The benefits of this project have to reach these people first before anybody else. It's a wildly diverse population, in ethnic terms, in socioeconomic terms. We have an extraordinary number of Black, Asian and ethnic minority people living in this part of the world, and also the youngest population in comparison to any other parts of the UK. But it's also where you have incredible levels of affluence right next to extreme poverty. And this creates lots of different challenges and is generating an increasingly, unfortunately, an increasingly sort of polarized experience. And there are lots of people who, and including ourselves in the East Bank Project, who see it as very important and that arts and culture has a role to play in bridging those increasing divides, bringing people together in new ways, and to sort of pursue the shared experience in a way that is sometimes not afforded in other avenues of life. It's also the other important context is that it's also where a lot of creative practitioners and businesses are based, increasingly historically, because this part of London was was quite cheap once upon a time, not so much anymore. And it was where lots of people could afford to be based or to have larger studios. So this creative community is a very important dimension of the context in which we'll be operating. And it means that we have, as an institution, an important role to play as advocates for affordable workspaces in the city, infrastructure that can help people develop their businesses or their independent practices or retain their studio spaces. So we have a lot to do to lobby private developers, lobby local authorities to work together to come up with solutions to some of the challenges that creative communities face when their primary concern is not necessarily hard profit in the first instance. So all of these sort of factors are important for the project. And on a personal note, the reason I worked at the V&A a very long time ago. I went off and worked in other places, and I came back to the V&A when we started working on this project in 2015, because I grew up in this part of London. I come from a very ordinary working class background. My career is in direct response to the visits I paid to museums, being taken there by my primary school teachers, being fostered at school and through the museums that I encountered, to being inspired by what I was seeing. And I feel like that our museum has an enormous role to play to open the eyes for young people who might not have that kind of background or have access to the art and culture that should be for everybody. So what we've been doing in order to build up a picture of what interest there is in cultural institutions and their potential benefit and use, and where the sort of needs are in terms of supporting educational activities, is developing sort of strands of research that enable us to really understand the context in which we'll be working. Together with the partners, we've been doing lots of different events and activities, getting to know audiences, offering free things for people to do in the summer when it's difficult to know what to do with your kids every single day, but also developing more focused summer schools so that teenagers particularly can have more focused time to develop different creative skill sets. And then we've been developing longer-term skills and employment training programs to enable opportunity for the people of this part of the world who might not have the sort of networks and contacts that you so often need to get employment in the creative industries or in the museums and gallery sector, to find their way to develop the skills that they need to develop. This is just an image of one of our projects in the Olympic Park in the summer. This woman with the blonde hair is one of my curators, Sam, who's there very much hands-on, as well as then using that sort of experience to feed into the programs that we're developing. We've also been having very formal conversations with our future users and audiences. So we've been targeting young people, the formal education sector, different community interest groups, the creative practitioners and smaller arts organizations that I mentioned earlier that are fundamental to the character of this part of London, and starting a series of conversations about where they think problems are, what they would want from East Bank, how we can work together, how can we be useful, what sort of place should we be making. And all of this has been feeding into our thinking about how we develop and how we will continue to grow and develop as we move closer towards opening and beyond opening. So some of our sort of activities to date, which will continue in the next few years and increase, have included satellite programs, so things that we as a team program as a sort of test experimental action research, if you like, ways of getting to know different neighborhoods, different people, taking V&A events out of South Kensington and hosting them and having them in East London. We have a stream of residencies where we've been inviting international practitioners to come be resident in East London, in collaboration with a studio provider. And again, that's another way of us developing our knowledge and our network within this particular context and working together with artistic practitioners who have a different way of working, a different set of methodologies, different questions to ask that we may at the museum. And that research and thinking is feeding into our approaches. And then we've been doing lots of collaborative projects between the East Bank partners. What you're seeing on the slide here is a project that we did around ceramics and tile making with a group of young people from this school, which is a very interesting school that was a very fine example of modern design from the 1950s, where the tiled wall was a commission from an artist who worked very closely with the architects. And the children live with this every single day and aren't necessarily always aware of the importance or the interesting sort of history of their immediate environment. So we did a project which allowed us to explore what it means to make ceramics, how you start the process of design, the history of Peggy Angus as the muralist who is represented in their school. So it's just about sort of opening up this sort of dialogue and opening up ways of seeing and ways of exploring the material world. So to here East and to Stratford Waterfront. So we've got two sites. Ooh, slides have been jumping around, sorry. Sometimes when PowerPoint converts, it makes everything shift. So this is our vision and mission. We want to, we have this enormous collection and expertise, and we want to sort of revolutionize, transform access to the collection by opening it up physically, enabling more digital access and encounters, but also critically, like intellectually, thinking about the collection in new ways, having a more sort of polyphonic institution. So it's not just sort of didactic, top-down, this is history in one way, but how do we become an institution that's much more porous and open to different forms of thinking through the past to understand the present, or positioning underrepresented histories, exploring the makers and practitioners or anonymous artisans who haven't had the spotlight in the way that they should have, or tackling very problematic histories of which our objects can sometimes speak. And we're doing this by kind of growing our partnerships in East London, rooting it there, and seeking to sort of fire the imagination and inspire people with what they find and see as a sort of catalyst to explore the creative world in a much greater way. So we'll be building these two new buildings, and originally in the first master plan we were just making one big building, and around the time I joined the project, the place that I mentioned just near the museum where we store a significant portion of our collection, it was decided by the government that they would sell that building. So in the making of this project, we also had the conundrum of what to do with 250,000 artifacts from the V&A's collection that needed a new home, 1,000 archives. And so we decided, after a second round of master planning, and I'll spare you the long and involved history of this project, we've ended up with two buildings. So one is the museum building at Stratford Waterfront, and the other is a collection and research centre at Here East. And they have a different character, different method of engagement, different sort of spaces of encounter, but together they make up V&A East, and the sort of ethos that I'm talking about will characterize them both. So you can just see the sort of computer sort of impressions, digitally rendered impressions of where we're going with these projects. On the left, we've got the museum building, which is designed by O'Donnell and Tuomey. They're an Irish-based practice in Dublin, known for their work across Ireland, in the UK, and increasingly in sort of Central and Eastern Europe. Very talented architects and teachers. They've been professors at University College Dublin for a very long time. And John and Sheila are a husband and wife kind of team who've been working together for many years. They're very interested in craft practice within the architecture and building. So their buildings are always the consequence of working out very carefully how things are made, how things are constructed. And on the right-hand side, we are working with Diller, Scofidio and Renfro, the New York-based practice, led by Liz Diller and Ricardo Scofidio, with Charles Renfro, who started off as a very sort of like a paper architects, very intellectual, very sort of propositional, experimental, didn't really build very much until they sort of hit an amazing point in the new millennium and started to build. And of course, they'll be known to you for their recent project in Moscow and the rethinking of the park. They're known for the High Line in New York, of course, this incredible public gesture to the city that recovers the use of the railway line. They've just opened the Shed in New York, and of course they're also well known for the Broad, an amazing contemporary art space in Los Angeles. So we're working directly with Liz Diller as the partner on this project, and it's a huge privilege to work with such an incredibly important practitioner, but also a woman who's, you know, deeply committed to and understands the nature of things as well as space and architectural concepts and construction. And I think that's what's the magical thing about Diller and Scofidio's project, is they're, in a similar way to John and Sheila, they just have this incredible drive and ambition towards creating beautiful, functional, unique spaces for the things of our world and places that will be enjoyable spaces for discovery. So Diller and Scofidio's scheme is very much an internal kind of working of the shed. They're not really doing much to the outside. It's all going to be put into the inside, and I'll come to that. So we're taking all of this research, looking at what's happening in museums and galleries around the world, looking at what's happening in our own institution, thinking about the type of place that we want to create, thinking about how we make our collections and programs more relevant and inspiring, and how can we reflect the sort of interdisciplinarity of today's world, of the fact that everybody is fluid across disciplines and things aren't as sort of carefully organized as perhaps they sort of seem to be represented in South Kensington's organizational logics. And so these are the sort of principles that are driving the way we approach the program. And this sort of centrality of dialogue, of being able to create sort of discussion around our objects and through programs is a very critical driver, and one that will characterize the experiences that we'll be developing. Here's just a recap of the bigger master plan picture. You can see the V&A's building towards the end of the site there. Next to it, some new homes that will be built in part to pay for the scheme. And it will create an entirely new piece of public realm, which you can, forgive these highly technical, really boring drawings. They're sort of the stage we're at is in technical design stage. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the buildings are a terrace, but they are wrapped around by this cascading new public landscape where we'll have lots of sort of lovely planting, create different terraces so we can have work and activities outside, so performance outdoors, free installations, pop-up events and markets, but also just a very pleasant place to sit throughout the year. And the designs for these are taking shape, and we are in the process of commissioning some site-specific works of art for these spaces, which will be announced next year, so that when you come, there'll be this added dimension of artistic intervention that will make the whole experience, add to the sort of quality of encounter. These are just some views of the building as it's emerging in the daytime and the evening. Again, these are just pulled from the model. They're not really sort of publicity shots. We're working on the next round of those at the moment, but this sort of precast concrete wrap around the building has taken its inspiration from a number of works in the collection that give space between the sort of inherent structure of the body and the form that cloaks it, particularly practitioners like Cristobal Balenciaga, whose visual language developed a kind of completely new sort of distinctive silhouette. So John and Sheila have been working on the kind of inner armature of the building, what it needs to do structurally, and then how it can have this kind of interesting concrete facade enclosing the spaces. So at this building, it's for the V&A, it's fairly modestly sized. It's still pretty sizable. It's about 7,000 square meters. We've got on the lower ground floor by the waterside, there'll be a cafe, and you'll enter sort of into the collection ribbon that will run throughout the public circulation spaces. On the floor above is the long-term gallery of V&A collection objects. The floor above that will be a co-curated space with the Smithsonian. Then we have a major temporary exhibition space, and on the top floor, a projects and event space where we can program more freely and host different sort of events and activities. So this is a sort of how the building is shaping up and the sort of cycles that we're looking at the moment. And this ribbon of design is something that's very much what you will encounter at the V&A. As soon as you step in the door, you're in the field of objects. They're all around you, and we wanted to make sure that same experience happened at South Kensington. These are just suggestions of things that we're looking at the moment, objects that can be situated in daylit spaces, don't have any concern around environmental sort of light conditions. We're still modeling this, so we will continue to sort of model how this looks for the next sort of 18 months. But what we also want to do is create these sort of very direct personal encounters with objects in different ways, but also stitch in some histories related to the kind of creative manufacturing heritage of East London throughout these sort of journeys through the building. How can we show treasures in the collection that speak to East London as a place of production and innovation over the years? As I said earlier, we were the first institution to introduce a public restaurant, and our cafes at South Kensington are extraordinary examples of the design of the day and of the sort of skilled craftsmanship of that period. And we're seeking to commission a creative practitioner who will bring the same kind of attitude, ethos, and spirit to our space at V&A East. And that will be announced, or he or she will be announced soon. In the collection gallery, we're very much thinking about, our mission is to revolutionize access and to inspire people about the sort of potential and power of creativity and art and design. And what we feel is really important is to be able to sort of inspire people as to what creativity and art and design brings to your life and how it relates to what you experience today. So we want to tune everything to design matters for now, if you like. And we're looking at one way to which we can do this by exploring not just how we make. The museum is a great encyclopedia of examples of technique, of process, of context, but actually why? Why do people design and make things in a professional context, in a personal context, in a collective context? What is it about the world that they want to change and address? Is it to make money? Is it to see the world differently? Is it to communicate something? Is it to disrupt or show something that's problematic in the world? And this sort of lens offers us a way of looking at the collection and the connections across history and the motivations, this very sort of personal, human kind of starting point for connecting with objects that at first might not seem terribly relevant to you but are intriguing or inspiring is the direction of traveling. We want this this gallery to really feel empowering and to look towards the ways in which design and artistic practice shapes the world around us. So it's not about the insular world of design, but it's about the design of the world, if you like. And these are just a sampling of some of the things that we're looking at, and shows you the sort of breadth of the collection. And it's quite a challenge to stretch from, sort of court samurai armor to the most technically kind of advanced handlebars for time trial cycle racing made in the UK in recent years. We're looking at the ways in which these things can come into dialogue and create sort of new, inspiring perspectives on the made world. At the Smithsonian Gallery, I just wanted to talk about the sort of genesis of our partnership and the importance of these two institutions, or what we see as the value and importance of these two institutions coming together. And we've got this opportunity to take a broader look at the made world. By working with the Smithsonian, we can kind of recover some of the origins of the V&A and introduce science and technology and the humanities in a way that our collections don't quite reach. So we'll be combining our collections, we'll be using our expertise in different ways, and our kind of research culture to sort of bring forward-thinking models of curatorial practice that really allow us to confront what's going on in the world today. What are the biggest issues that face us, whether that's sustainability and the kind of climate crisis, or designing and thinking through aging populations in a different way, or the meaning and potential impact of artificial intelligence and technologies in the way that there have always been these paradigmatic shifts in moments of intense innovation. So we want to confront these issues and create a sort of space for dialogue and for many different perspectives on how we live and how we have lived in the past, to give us some clues as to where we might go in the future. I'm going to have to really move on quite quickly, otherwise I'll run out of time, I think. So we've got kind of dimensions to our partnership. At the center is a co-curated gallery program. We'll be working on exhibitions together. We'll be developing collaborative research. Really all of this is about sort of enabling co-creation with visitors and new forms of research. The Smithsonian do things like cultural recovery programs in Haiti, as you can see here, and they have many different research centers around the world. We've been doing projects like this one that's shown on the bottom, which is a music project with a grime artist in the UK called Skepta, a very important artist, and he and the V&A and Levi's worked together to create new music production infrastructure in the borough where he's from, working with local people, mentored by Skepta to develop their talents. And so some of these things chime for both of us and point to the ways that we can be progressive and contribute something new to the landscape of infrastructure in East London. So you know that obviously the Smithsonian has continually expands its museum landscapes, thinking constantly through new ways of presenting. You can see in the background here the recently opened Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, designed by David A.J., a very beautiful building, but more importantly, a very important space addressing African American experience from the first moments of slavery and movement of peoples into North America through to today, and how African American populations have experienced and lived in America over time, and it's been a long overdue history to be mined. So our partnership will have at its heart this sort of exhibition gallery. I can't talk about what we're going to be doing, we're not quite ready to be sharing that, but we're looking at actually that gallery, instead of being a long-term display like the one below, we will tackle a topic every 2 years, so it becomes more like an exhibition experience where we intensely interrogate something that's affecting the world today, and then 2 years after that we'll completely change the gallery. New objects will come from the Smithsonian, from the V&A's collection, there'll be, live programs interrogating all of this at the heart of what we're doing. So it's a great opportunity to drive some of this sort of agenda-setting programming and research. And these are some of the ways in which we've been just looking across our collection and how we can stretch from technological innovation to our objects of ethnographic sort of importance and heritage through to progressive artworks. How might these come together? And we're really driven by this sort of framework of the gallery being about ideas, objects, and people. And those stories and telling stories in different ways is at the heart of what we're trying to do. So we go up a level, we're just going up in the building to the exhibition space. We're currently planning for 2 major exhibitions a year. The first will be co-curated with the Smithsonian, and then 1 and 4 will be curated by the Smithsonian. And we haven't set our program as yet. We're looking at the ways in which we can respond to the disciplinary kind of context of the East Bank, but also how might we collaborate internationally and bring projects to London that start their life elsewhere. And critically, we want to make sure that our program has a broad and popular appeal. On the top floor, we've got, this looks like the most boring space in the world. There's no other drawing for this at the moment. It's just a big empty room until we figure out what we're going to be doing with it. But the idea is that it's an open project space that we use in any way we like. And what we're looking to do is making it a great place to be in on a day-to-day, but also a space for site-specific installations, for research projects, and so on. So I won't dwell on the most boring space in the world as yet. But if you go to the new Whitney, for example, you've got these beautiful spaces within the galleries where you can just meet the city. The project on the top right, speaks to the ways in which increasingly institutions are staging live projects so that they have a kind of greater participation with the public. On the bottom right is a performance by Christian Marclay, a very important, interesting Swiss-American artist who lives in London, who likes to engage with collections in new ways by creating these sort of sonic encounters and performances. Or we might do something like an immersive one-off installation. So we're thinking through all these different sort of ideas at the moment. Now, if you walk for about 10 minutes, you'll get to the collection centre, which we are building in the corner of Here East. We have a site which is about 16,000 square meters. We will be moving 250,000 objects into this building and 12 linear kilometers of archives that we have. It's an important place where we'll house our collection and where you can formally study the collection. You make an appointment to come and see artifacts that you want to examine very closely in our reading rooms. But we're also building spaces for studio practice and workshops. If we can teach from those spaces from school age to graduate and doctoral level. This is sort of the more flexible of our 2 spaces in East London, where we have opportunities to use these studios, use our study rooms to really open up and think through the collection in new ways. So Diller and Scofidio's design really is like, making some sort of clever moves with an existing building, simplifying the sort of way we can use the shed, if you like, creating this sort of entrance through and this walk up, which I'll show you in a moment, into this public heart of the collection centre. Housing 250,000 objects is no mean feat, especially when they range from massive fragments of buildings to tiny shards of pottery from Syria. It's really a massive spectrum of objects that have different environmental conditions and requirements, different access requirements, and all of that sort of logical thinking about how we create a centre that's efficient, where we can provide more access, we can work more easily with our collections for research and for exhibition making and for loan, but also what are the new ways we can inspire different forms of encounter. And these are the things that we're thinking about at the moment through these sort of design principles that Liz and her team have developed for the project. So you can see here, have I got that? No, I haven't got the slide, sorry. You'll come off the street into our sort of, sorry, I use my hands a lot and then I forget the microphone is there. You come off the street into a sort of welcome area where we want that space to be, obviously where you find out about what's going on in the building if you haven't found out about it before, but also where you can come and hang out and have a coffee, sit and do your work, and or have lunch. The studios are on that floor, and then you will journey up into this excavated sort of core of the building. And what's coming off of the core are some of the types of storage that we will need to house our collections, shelving essentially. But Diller and Scofidio have created this great scheme where this sort of cutting through of the shelving means that we have these sort of what they call hacked ends, so we can use the ends as a space for displaying our collection, for turning objects towards the public. And this public network is the space in which visitors will be able to explore freely without anybody accompanying them, finding collection objects, pulling out stories, discovering histories of collecting in the museum, the behind-the-scenes sort of processes. And then on the way, it's punctuated by the installation of a number of significantly sized architectural fragment and period rooms that we have in our collection that we cannot show at South Kensington or anywhere else on our estate. So it begins with this sort of 360-degree view of the V&A collection. It's anchored by these large objects, as I've just said, and then this network will connect you to formal study spaces or for smaller gallery spaces like you can see on the bottom left here. This is an out-of-date render, but it gives you a sense of carving out spaces for much more informal displays where we can bring together a small number of objects or have an entirely new kind of immersive digital collection work on display. And then in the studios we'll be teaching and looking at different creative processes. Here's the central stairway. It won't look like this. The design has moved on, but we're not ready to publish sort of visuals as yet. But you'll come up the stairs through the collection. There's no longer this glass there. Into the collection hall, as I said. And what we're looking at doing at the moment is thinking about all of the objects that can be presented in this central hall, which will be like a daylit space. So you'll have this great sort of daylight coming down from the top. And that demands that objects are kind of robust enough to sit in these conditions. So we've been looking at everything we've got in our collection from ancient urns through to contemporary puppetry from the set of the War Horse. But we want to create this sort of intensity of collection and that sublime habitation that Liz and her team have sort of seen as one of the driving principles, through to these more spotlit moments, as you can see on the top left there. How do we bring singular objects forward to sing in a different way? And what is the role of digital tools and technologies in enhancing your experience or encounter with these objects? The gallery won't quite look like this. It will be more of a white box condition, so we can use it for a range of different objects and encounters. And this is just the sort of user experience diagram of how you'll sort of move through the space to meet some of the large objects. These are our current objects that we're modeling for to put back on displays. We've got whole fragments of buildings, 360-degree paintings, which were all the rage in 19th century London, through to a monumental gallery for the display of monumental textile works. So the Torrijos ceiling, for example, this is a terrible rendering of this. It's not possible to really photograph this object or reproduce it in any way that's true to the artifact. It's a 35 square meter, 5 meter deep inlaid marquetry ceiling that was representative of the kind of extraordinary skills and mixing of motifs from North African and Southern Spanish, more Christian influences, that was situated in a palace in Toledo. There are 4 ceilings in existence. 3 of them are on show elsewhere around the world. Ours has never been on show, so we are undertaking the conservation of this object to create a new ceiling for a new gallery in which we can then show works related to it, show completely different works from the collection, create spaces for artists to intervene, or for different curatorial research to have a platform. And the gallery here, as I said, we've designed it for the largest 2D object in our collection, which is this stage cloth, backcloth for a performance of the Firebird, which was staged by the Ballet Russe in London in the 1930s. This is a design for a part of the latter part of the production by Natalia Goncharova. It's impossible for us to show this work currently in any of our spaces. We have to show it by lending it to somebody else. So we've created a gallery with a very sort of simple theatrical rigging where we can just sort of pull cloths up, or other large paintings and other textiles that we have, or indeed show monumental video works in here. But we have 2 floors to this gallery, so you can be on the ground floor looking up, or you can be on a kind of walkway at the upper level overlooking, as if you were sort of sitting in the theatre at that height. That gives us great opportunity to have live program around the objects on display in this gallery. We've already been talking with Sadler's Wells about how we could enliven and enrich your experience of this work through live dance, or scenes reenacted from the production itself, or contextual displays. We'll also use this space as an auditorium and lecture theatre, a bit like in here. And then we're looking at the ways in which we can use different technologies to enhance engagement and encounter with objects. These are just conceptual ideas at the moment, but we're looking at if an object can't come to you, how can you come to it, and what are the ways in which we could explore and develop different methods of encounter using sort of novel technologies. We're also building in opportunities for the public to explore our work in greater depth by seeing and observing and interacting with the conservation that happens in the centre. Our loans program, looking at how curatorial processes work and how they happen. For Balenciaga, for example, we mounted a small display of objects that weren't selected for the show, because we mounted every single Balenciaga dress or artifact that we had in the collection, so the curators could see them all on figures and then decide which ones they wanted. And the ones that weren't shown, takes a long time to what's that? Is that time for me to finish? Ooh, hello. Somebody's won a prize in the audience.
We have like 10 more minutes. So.
Okay. Yeah. So,
but Catherine, we also have to leave some time for the Q&A. So maybe
this is just a sense of what our workshops will look like. The Firebird backcloth again, which I wanted to highlight as a significant work that by practitioners of this country. And Anna asked me to just flag the ways in which some of our Russian artifacts might come forward. Obviously, if we've got this amazing design by Goncharova for the Ballet Russe, we have a lot of other works by her in the collection, and we may choose to contextualize this particular design for the Firebird with her designs for other productions. But we have a lot of different material in the collection, beautiful enamels commissioned by Peter the Great, through to architecture drawings and conceptual sort of projects by people like Alexander Brodsky and Utkin. Brodsky is one of my favorite practitioners working today. So we can draw on all of these sort of incredible treasures, and this is what we won't have a sort of Russian gallery or a British gallery, but I think there's so much by way of dialogue across places, across different types of practice and across time, and that's really what we want to explore with our project. Thank you.
Спасибо, Кэтрин.
I could keep going. Oh, yeah.
Спасибо большое. Я думаю, у нас будет еще минут 10-15 на ваши вопросы. Если можно, я начну. Кэтрин. По сути, когда Генри Коул создавал первый музей Виктории Альберта, оригинальный музей Виктории Альберта в Лондоне, это был совершенно революционный подход к показу артефактов, к тому, что такое музей. Сегодня, по сути, вы пытаетесь снова революционизировать эту историю и создать уже музей 21 века. Супер ультрасовременный. Кэтрин, вот если можно, очень коротко, буквально, может быть, три points, если вы можете нам дать того, почему это будет действительно музей 21 века. 3-4 points.
Yeah, excellent question. Just 3. I think there are aspects which are about museology in general, and then there are aspects that are particular to the V&A. I think it's important that, you know, encyclopedic institutions like ours of the sort of 19th century model begin to open up new ways of looking at the collection that aren't about a sort of single authoritative voice, and invite and make possible dialogue around the history and the kind of contemporary relevance and meaning of our collections. And we're very much committed to trying to do that, to ask questions, to enable objects to have multiple lives and multiple voices. And that's one big driving factor. I think the kind of experience and encounter within the galleries and within our spaces is going to be really important. It's not possible to show you yet because we're doing that work. And I think, you know, our galleries at the V&A and in a lot of museums of this sort of size and period are extremely, they're very formal, and I think people sometimes find that quite problematic and not very inviting. And so I think the invitation is another, or the space of dwelling is going to be particularly important. How can you sort of change and transgress those boundaries between visitor and collection and ideas? And I think that's one of our drivers. And I think the other is just it's being made in the 21st century. It needs to reflect what's going on in the world today. And we can do that in all sorts of different ways. And personally, for me, I think the other big thing for us is in the UK, and this will stand for lots of other places, the cultural sector is the least diverse of any of the professions, whether that's in terms of gender, ethnicity, class, and that is also the big driver for us. How can we have people from a greater range of backgrounds that reflects the population in which we are living and working in our neighbourhood in East London, and how can we ensure that it, you know, up and down the institution, from the top to the bottom, is representative and more inclusive in that way.
Спасибо. Thank you. Я думаю, у нас есть время для одного-двух вопросов. Пожалуйста, поднимайте руку.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I talk too much, I think.
Здравствуйте, спасибо за лекцию. Я бы хотела узнать, каким критериям должна соответствовать выставка фотографий, чтобы быть представлена в вашем музее.
That's a good question. I mean, we do tend to generate our own exhibitions, and I think that's beginning to change now in terms of working with other institutions to bring exhibitions to London or to, you know, adapt them for our audiences. Our photography curators define our photography collections and displays as the art of photography. So there's an emphasis on photography as an art form rather than as a social document, although I don't necessarily hold with those binary sort of divisions, if you like. I think we want to showcase practice that perhaps doesn't always have a very big audience, but at the same time you need to be able to entice people in by having, recognizable names or imagery. So it's really varied. I'm hoping that the start of the photography center will mean that there will be more major exhibitions of photography. Our displays have been quite modest in scale. And in recent years, we've been looking at sort of bodies of practitioners from different parts of the world. We had an amazing exhibition on contemporary photography from South Africa, for example. We host the Pre-Pictet, which has just opened last week at South Kensington. So the criteria is hard because it's really varied, but our curators are constantly, acquiring work, looking at what's happening in the world of photography, as well as building historic collections. So yeah, I'm not sure I can give you a very good answer on the criteria, but write to them if you feel like you've got some ideas of what they should be doing.
Еще вопросы?
There's one next door.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much for your speech. It was very exciting and very inspiring project. I have a question connected with disabled people, because we have seen the research of the population near the museum, of correlation between different nations and so on. But are you planning any special spaces or opportunities for disabled people? Because nowadays it's a very interesting topic, and it's the topic of current interest. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are many different levels at which designing inclusively works, and I think I've mentioned a different sort of a broader spectrum of inclusivity. But our buildings will have to be legally compliant for many different body types and bodily abilities. Out of the Olympics, and particularly the Paralympics, in the park, a forum was established for research into innovation around disability globally. So that's a very important research community that we can work with, or are beginning to work with in small ways, and that's about designing spaces, innovating in terms of augmentation and design that can address different physical abilities. And then I'm about to, hopefully, fingers crossed if I get some funding, work with a cluster of designers and academics looking at the ways in which we can develop the design of our galleries, specifically as kind of spaces of very direct and very clear inclusivity agenda, so spatially, physically, but also how can we lower barriers to entry if you feel intimidated by the world of museums and cultures. So we're looking to do that quite holistically. There are some colleagues in the museum who are collecting in this stream and looking to develop an exhibition and foregrounding this area of research quite explicitly. But I think it is also about trying to sort of overturn people's perceptions of you are not disabled. It's sort of the world that disables you. You're just one of a sort of spectrum of ably-bodied people or differently abled people. So all of these kind of questions are very important at the moment in the cultural sector in the UK, and we're using our different aspects of the project to address them in different ways, create spaces for everybody, but also put those territories of research on the map directly through exhibitions and through programs so that we can change perceptions.
Спасибо большое, Кэтрин. На самом деле, то, что вы сейчас сказали, это еще одно основание называть музей V&A музеем 21 века. Конечно, инклюзивность – это одно из оснований, на котором сейчас должны строиться музеи. Дорогие коллеги, друзья, к сожалению, коллеги с форума им уже необходимо начинать менять площадку для следующей лекции. Если у вас остались вопросы к Кэтрин, то вы можете задать их лично. Мы сейчас пройдем в кафе. Я бы хотела поблагодарить Кэтрин Инce за то, что она прилетела к нам из Лондона.
Thank you. Thank you.
Большое спасибо Культурному форуму за организацию и моим замечательным коллегам в Манеже, София, Ангелина, Катя, большое спасибо.